Eric, thanks for coming on again, man.
Adam, glad to be back. My
Yeah, it's
pleasure.
great. It's great to chat to you again, dude. Um, so how have you been doing? I know we talked a bit offline, but for those who haven't heard from you on this podcast for a while, have you been doing during lockdown? How's your training going? How's your life been? How are you keeping in between the years?
I'm well. Yeah, very fortunate here in New Zealand. We had a second minor surge that lasted a few weeks before we got back to zero community transmission of COVID. That happened as we were moving into a new place. It also happened when I was a few weeks out from Masters Nationals in weightlifting. So, it messed up my training a little bit, but I was still able to borrow a barbell and snatch in a partially moved into garage for a little bit before we got our home gym going. And yeah, so I'm a little over 4 weeks out from a powerlifting meet, and training's going well. Um, that's an interesting experience, being very detrained from the power lifts and seeing my performance go up every week. It's a nice feeling. Not as nice as when it's a higher number and going up fast every week, but yeah, I'll it's a lot of fun. I'm well, and we're very fortunate here with COVID for sure in New Zealand.
I think it's been probably one of the best or one of the models for how to tackle it, I guess, worldwide. Won't get into that because I don't know really anything about about infectious disease or public health. But yeah, I think it's been pretty hard in Europe and the US as well. Bodybuilding shows all got cancelled. The one natural
Mm.
bodybuilding show in Ireland, I had a few clients that were going to compete in it for first time. The one that I competed in last year got cancelled. Just there's no
That's
gyms,
rough.
so
Yeah.
people can't. You can't expect people to really prep without a gym. In fairness, and I saw in the UK they only had one show as well. The UK the
Hmm.
FBA last 2 weeks ago or so, which is great that it got to go ahead because I really enjoyed watching it. But yeah, it's been tough, and the World's cancelled this year as well. So hopefully next year things are a little bit better. So this podcast, what I really want to talk to you about was bodybuilding. So a lot of people who listen to this like bodybuilding, natural bodybuilding, and the topic I really want to touch on was what does it mean, or how do you become a successful natural bodybuilder?
Hmm.
And what I mean with this is not just what are the tactics that you have to do, although that's important as well, but how do you become a mentally successful natural bodybuilder? Because like I said, not everyone's gonna win, and I think I spoke to Alberto last week about bodybuilding. I can't remember the topic now, but we talked about just how some of the top natural bodybuilders, like top, are just genetic freaks. To be honest, probably most of them are that win worlds, for example, and some of them don't actually have to. I won't say they don't have to try that hard, but they're kind of relaxed and they do very well without getting too caught up in the minutia, and that's often why we talked about when they cross over to say untested, like some of the guys cross over, they don't do that well because you got to be very on point with your pharmacology and it's a whole another realm. And some guys do really well, like Sean Clarita, I can't pronounce his second name, but you know who I'm talking about.
Sean Clarita, Kai Green.
Clarita, Kai Green, yeah, exactly. So these guys obviously are spot on with everything and ticking all their boxes, whereas some other guys that have crossed over haven't really done that well. Where you think, well, they're top at natural bodybuilding, so unless they have a really shitty response to anabolics, they're going to be pretty high up in that side of things. But if you're taking this kind of relaxed mindset in natural bodybuilding and they just have they train hard and they eat enough protein and they just have great genetics, so that's why it's not an ideal to ask somebody like that what is it to become a champion bodybuilder. But for others, then I guess how do you deem yourself or how do you deem yourself to be a successful natural bodybuilder or to become as successful as you possibly can? So I know that's a loaded question, but I guess let's start with the tactics point of view. So
Sure.
if you were saying, from all your, I don't know how many years it is now that you've been into bodybuilding, but I know it's at least 15, I'd say, right?
Yeah,
Um,
just right around there. Did my
yeah.
first show in '07, and I was training for that purposefully in '06 and '05. So yeah, we're right around
Hmm.
there.
and all the clients that you trained within personally, and also as part as 3D MJ, and also your research. How does someone like maximize their if they want to be, I want to be Eric, I want to be a pro world champion one day, whether that's achievable or not, this is like hypothetically, what do they got to do? Nutrition, training, and I know we only got like 40 minutes, but
they tell you everything you need to know.
yeah.
Yeah. I think it's important to start zoomed out. So I think the first thing we need to understand is that many people in many sports and typical sports models, they have a far shorter time to peak. So like if you want to be a good gymnast, the typical model is you start training as a single digit human, you know, and if you're not doing something pretty impressive before you're an adult, you're probably not going to be an Olympian, you know. That is absolutely not the case in bodybuilding. Even if you look at other sports, like for example, you got till your late 20s or early 30s in some sports to kind of hit your peak. In natural bodybuilding, you have a legitimate shot at being just as good as you were in your late 20s as you are in your late 40s, but arguably, and most of the time, a bit better in your late 40s. Even if physically you might be similar size, you might be more consistent with your conditioning, better posing, shorten up a little more weak points. I can think of a lot of examples where most of the time people are grown men before, or women before they're at their personal peak. I have not done a poll of the age of like world champions or anything like that, but the age of most people who win a pro card, there's a little bit of data on this, is in their late 20s. And then most people requires a few more years in the pro ranks before they start to actually place and do well, and especially at the world level to do well. I would not be surprised at all if like the average age of someone who medals at worlds isn't like 33. And I bet if we took the range, we'd see people in their 40s. Martin Daniels, for example, who is a WNBF world champion, and he's now turned pro everywhere, including the IFBB. I think as a classic physique bodybuilder. Yeah, he's, I want to say, in his 50s now. Marshall Johnson, who at his peak lost to Doug Miller by 1 point, did that at the age of in his early 50s. Jeff Alberts, he's currently at his best, and he's turned 49. So I think we need to realize that being successful in bodybuilding is something. It's not just about the old adage of it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. While that's true, what I'm really getting at is that you want to avoid burnout like the plague. And ironically, I would say bodybuilding has probably a higher risk of burnout than like many other sports, because it asks you to manipulate your entire lifestyle with the nutrition changes. So I think first off, the whole strategy needs to be, all right, I've got, let's say you're a young person in your young 20s, and you're going to start to do competitive bodybuilding. You go, okay, cool, I got 2 decades to do this. And if I rush into this, I may burn out early, or just not enjoy or love the sport anymore. I may get an injury or have to deal with a period where I'm mentally really messed up from the sport and come back to it. But you want to avoid burnout with the plague. You want to basically foster the passion for the sport, because while you kind of put forth that, hey, a lot of these world champions are genetic freaks, and then I would say at a certain level in natural bodybuilding, there is certain natural talent entry to even get into that echelon. But another thing that is a barrier, like a certain barrier to even get into any echelon of bodybuilding or even on stage, is you have to be pretty passionate about it. There's a lot of people who do it once, tick that box, got some photos they can show to their grandkids, and they're done. But for people to actually compete bodybuilding long term, that requires a certain level of passion and the ability to maintain it. So those are like the 2 entry criteria, because there's a lot of genetic freaks who do bodybuilding and hate it, and never do it again. So they're obviously, they haven't maximized their potential. And then there's a lot of people who can't get there because they don't have the talent, but they stay in the sport. But the only way you're going to have a shot is if you're actually in the sport to do well. So, if we take kind of the archetype of someone who is, decent genetically and with a lot of hard work and a lot of years will be able to, rub elbows with some of these guys who are world champions and, maybe win a smaller show or, place top 5 at world or something like that, which is an incredible accomplishment. Don't get me wrong. But it doesn't necessarily require you to be a total freak of freaks. I think the big picture perspective is that you have to create a lifestyle which makes focusing on the minutia, crossing your T's, dotting your I's, and being incredibly consistent and being very ruthless in your ability to be self-critical, but in a non-harsh way to make improvements. You have to do that and not burn out. And I think that is like the first answer I would give to your question is you need to find a sustainable way of being passionate and competitive for
Yeah,
like a
I
couple
think
decades.
that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, I was actually just looking at some photos yesterday, and the guy was like, I was like, this guy could be a great natural bodybuilder, but he was like clearly, heavy and didn't look like he ever competed. So there's probably a lot of freaks out there that could be really good natural bodybuilders, but you have to want to do the pants dance and suffer and put yourself through all this. And that obviously makes sense. It's probably one of the tougher sports or endeavors or whatever you want to call it, because it's by the end when you're getting on stage, it's 24/7. You just are
Mm-hmm.
reminded what you're doing, so that does make a lot of sense. And then I guess you're touching on the point of trying to be as perfect as possible, but then not crossing that line where you start to resent doing it, because then you're going to automatically eliminate yourself from being a good natural bodybuilder long term because you're not in the sport, right? And
That's
I
right.
see that with I don't know if I see this with like if it's in like untested bodybuilding, IFB bodybuilding, or something else, but a lot of them don't last that long. I don't know if it's because they put their body through so much and they just mentally they feel like they can't do it anymore. But when you talked about guys don't hit their peak till 40s or whatever, or at least a lot of them do, that's an anomaly in like in the IFBB. You don't see that at all. You rarely see somebody that's over 40 that's still competing. You see Dexter Jackson or whatever, but it's usually
Ronnie
the guys
Coleman.
who are younger. Yeah, but a
Ronnie
lot of
competed
time,
into his 40s. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Dexter Jackson. I think that is almost more survivorship bias than it is like I have to think about this, because I would agree. There are a ton of people who just fall away, and in the enhanced ranks, you understandably have people with a little more extreme mindsets. It is. I mean, don't get me wrong. Natural bodybuilding is extreme, and you have to be a little messed up in the head like us to decide to do this and long term to continue to do it. But if you also then go, sweet, I want to take that and I want to throw a whole crap ton of pharmacology on top of it, I think that lends itself towards being attractive people with extreme personality types. And extreme personality types, the easy thing to do is to flip the switch, go all in, think black and white about it. But that absolutely has to be tempered to some degree for you to stay in, or you are exactly what you're talking about. A lot of people who burn out. So I think the IFBB pro champions who we've seen have been around a long time, who compete into their 40s, a great example like Dexter Jackson, they have a relaxed air to them. They have a confidence, but also an extreme focus. And I don't think that is the norm,
yeah,
Like if you listen to Ronnie Coleman talk about it, he sounds like the most relaxed guy in the world, but he's also, when you listen to how dedicated he was and how nothing keeps him out of the gym, he also has an extreme personality type. So holding both of those simultaneously is relatively rare. I
do
think
you
what
think
we
that
see a lot. Go ahead.
do you think that in to be at the top of any sports, because to be honest, I haven't really been at the top. I played basketball when I was younger for Ireland, but it's it's not a big sport here. But do you think that to be at the top of any sport that requires a lot, you do need to have that mindset of almost brushing the line with or flirting with being too much, or tipping yourself over the edge in order to succeed? Like, is there a fine line between, like, you really need to push yourself to almost be obsessed to an extent, but you don't want to. But those who maybe step the line a little bit are the ones who kind of fall away, or because you can't take a too much of a relaxed approach with bodybuilding, right? Or any sports. You can't be like 3 weeks out, but I'm gonna have pizza because I'm relaxed and drinking beers and stuff and skipping the gym. That's a nonchalant approach, but you're not going to do well. So, what are your thoughts with that kind of flirting with the idea of almost being obsessive?
I think it needs to feel semi-relaxed to you, even though from an outsider's perspective, it looks obsessive. Um, so, like you said, if you're having pizza 3 weeks out, you're simply not going to do well, you know. But if you're 3 weeks out and you look like an OCD like bag of anxiety, who's constantly like asking questions and worried about things, and oh my god this, oh my god that, that's fine if you're a first or second time competitor. That's everybody, to some degree. But if you're still like that and you're a pro and you lose your shit every time you're 3 weeks out, you still cross your T's and dot all your I's, but the mental toll it takes is huge. I don't think I don't think you're going to be that successful long term, or you will, or you might burn out. I think there would actually be a competitive cost to that. Those people typically blink at the wrong time, make weird decisions because they get too emotionally caught up and can't be objective. So I think from an outsider's perspective, you need to be the guy or the gal who gets up on stage and you're like, holy crap, you're shredded. But yeah, no big deal. At a certain point, you need to get there in your career to where you're doing what you do. And I think that's what sustainability looks like is, yeah, someone else goes, God, I couldn't wake up at that time. I couldn't do that cardio. I couldn't train like that. I couldn't, weigh and track all my food. I couldn't, sustain a deficit for 30 weeks. I couldn't go on a diet break and not blow out my meal, not blow out my calorie intake. I couldn't do X. I couldn't do Y. I couldn't even, bigger picture, I couldn't go through the recovery diet process and then the off season without, really gaining too much weight, hating myself, and then come back and do it again in 2 years. I would be spending all that time just trying to recover from my season. I think someone who does that and deals with it and ticks the boxes and comes back again and again and again and again, getting better, that will look relaxed, but objectively, you're realizing, wow, that's a lot they're doing, and I think you can see that parallel in other sports who, they talk to you about their 30-hour training week and having to get down, 7,000 calories and having a team of people around them from physios to nutritionists, and they're just ticking off every next thing they need to do. But they're relatively chill, and I think that is what sustainability looks like, to be clear. I think what a lot of bodybuilders do is they are super OCD. They have a lot of anxiety. They're stressed. They're always trying to tick boxes and cross X's and O's, but it's more out of a fear or a compulsion or an obsessiveness rather than let's figure out what I need to do to get the job done. And then how do I figure out how to make this sustainable? So I think so they hear like someone who is like that already and needs to confirm their own that what they're doing is okay. They hear it's really important to be almost obsessed, and they go, okay, cool. So it's fine that I'm crazy. And then, but the pros, like if you ever hang out with the pros at a big show, they are chill backstage. And that's the genetically gifted ones. That's the non-genetically gifted ones. Some may have been a little more on their diet than others. Like we talked about earlier, they can get away with more because they have a lot of talent. But all of them, the ones who are high level pros who've been in it for a while, they're chill backstage, walking around with their, cross-striated cheekbones and shit. So I think that's something, that's what that looks like. And I think that is almost just kind of like a flavor perspective. I think it's important for people who are like white knuckling it at the end of prep and barely able to keep their anxiety under control, that, okay, that's fine if you're there now, but where you need to get to is doing all that without it creating a ton of stress, but you're still doing it all.
So you think it's more of an acquired skill rather than an inherent characteristic of somebody to build that capacity over time, rather than I'm just an anxious person or I'm an OCD obsessed person, so I got into bodybuilding because I like lifting weights, rather than I can learn the skill. because the way you talked about all the pros, it means it's either, again, survivorship bias, where only the stress, the relaxed ones survive, or else it's something that, you know, they've gained and over the years from competing and just going through the process.
Yeah, I think very few people are truly mentally built for bodybuilding. You know, like being mentally built for starvation is kind of like it's not really like a normal thing for anybody. I think what I've observed as a coach over the last 10 years is that people who are take a little more of a relaxed approach, or the people who are super anxious, both of them move towards each other. They get to some kind of happy medium. I started as being too obsessive, too anxious, too OCD about things. Berto started as being too relaxed. And, you know, we had very different first seasons. He got on stage confident and, you know, 30 pounds over. I got on stage having, you know, crushed myself, and I gained 40 pounds right after the season was over. I was, you know, pretty lean for a first time competitor, but not as shredded as I got. But I got there through doing a lot of worrying and stress, and really kind of stressed myself out and almost burned out my first season, while he took probably far too of a relaxed approach and didn't do very well. So we both had different types of consequences. Then he moved towards, let me be a lot more controlled, and crushed it in his 08 season. Got, you know, 3 pro cards, competed for his first time. And he did a reverse diet where he was adding like 5 grams of carbs and a gram of fat like every day, and maintained stage condition into like 2 months post show. And everyone's like, why aren't you eating? Of course, this was, you know, 2008. So I think that, like, and for myself, I've come to basically the whole creation of 3DMJ was me getting closer to kind of Jeff Albert's, where he'd learned to get to. So I think it is absolutely a learned effect. You start somewhere along that continuum, and you have to move away from kind of leaning on your extremity or lack thereof to find that happy medium. You need to either dot more I's or cross more T's, but not let it stress you out too much, or you need to realize that you're putting too much meaning or stress or emotion, or the motivation behind crossing those T's and dotting those I's is anxiety or obsession, or feeling the need to, or like I'm not good enough, or something negative. So a lot of it is reframing for the more anxious folks, and a lot of it is learning to be more focused on the minutiae without it taking over your life for the less obsessive folks.
So I guess it's individual, you know, what that means for each person, because what would you seem to have a fairly relaxed approach to your off season. I don't know what you do with your nutrition. You know, I saw the pizza guy deliver there just before we got on.
That's right. Joking. Yep. At 9:35 a.m. I got a pizza delivered to my house, folks. Yeah.
No, but I mean,
they're not open yet, but for me, they make the special delivery at 9 a.m. I love
it. No, but you're training, right? So you're talking about your powerlifting. I know you do some Olympic weightlifting and stuff. So you're kind of enjoying yourself. You know, you're not strictly doing bodybuilding style training, even though, you know, it's all contributing to muscle gain, etc. But what are your thoughts then of somebody who would say, like, I really want to have a really successful off season, so I'm going to take the approach like my on season. I'm going to track my heart rate variability. I'm going to track my sleep every night. I'm going to track my macros every single day to the T. I'm going to treat my off season like an on season, so that I can be the best. So, you know, they see other people doing that, that's had success. So, you know, that they want to do that, and they can justify that as, well, you know, I'm taking this very seriously. I'm going to put everything into it. That doesn't seem like the approach that you're taking personally now, at least from my observations. But what are your thoughts with somebody like that? And do you think that, well, it depends again on individual basis, that might be obsessive for some, but it might be perfectly fine for others, or is it the way that you kind of approach it? And how would you even know if you're being obsessive?
Yeah, I mean, it's obsessive is completely in the eye of the beholder. So it all comes down to sustainability. Like you talked about, there's an individual approach. The destination's the same for everybody, in my opinion, for what you're trying to get to. That description of what I gave earlier of someone who is doing it all and ticking all the boxes, but it is not something that is, you know, they don't have to white knuckle it to do it. But how to get there looks different for other people. That might be chilling out more. and focusing on the things that do matter and less on the things that don't. Or it might be, hey, you actually need to weigh your vegetables during prep, bro. Like, don't just throw them in there because, um, so both people are trying to go to the same destination, but it does look like a different pathway. As far as what needs to be done in the off season, I think this is where the evidence-based community is quite useful, because science is all about kind of telling you like what doesn't work, not what does, based on our statistical modeling. And when things don't make a difference, that's something, if we have enough data, we can be like, look, like that's probably not, like, I don't think there's going to be a big difference between you hitting 350 grams of carbs or 450 grams of carbs with an equal isocaloric exchange for fat, and this is just an example. That's not true of everyone. There may be someone listening who that absolutely is not true for, and they'd be better on one or the other. But let's say that is the case. You might be having a quote unquote more hardcore off season by weighing out and making sure you hit 450 grams of carbs instead of 350. But I see anytime there's added complexity with no benefit, that's not a neutral, that's a negative in my mind, because that takes up energy, that takes up focus, that takes up your brain space, that could be focused on something else. So I am, the one thing I can say that from my experience as a coach is that a lot of the things that bodybuilders do to try to quote unquote optimize everything, when it doesn't actually have an impact, it's a negative, not neutral. So I had to shift my mindset from that, because I used to be like, anything that has even a remote chance of helping me a little bit, I'm going to bet money on. I'll buy that supplement. I'll spend time doing that. I will add that exercise in, and not realizing that everything is a trade-off. Every time you add something else, you're subtracting something else, even if it's just the opportunity cost. Every time you are saying yes to something, you're saying no to everything else that could have fit that spot in terms of energy or time. So I'm a rigid believer, not a rigid believer, I'm a ruthless believer, some kind of good descriptor term that emphasizes the importance of this, of getting your big rocks, pebbles, and sand in order. And I think that applies at all levels. And so when someone says, I want to have an off season, and they describe being as precise as they would be during prep, I remind them there's a reason why bodybuilders aren't in shape all the time. And I remind them that that's how precise we need it to be. And how many things got worse during prep because of that focus, that there's a cost, whether that is social, whether that is emotional, whether that is sleep, whether that is all the other effects. Some of it's just physiological because we're getting shredded, but a lot of it is because of the amount of energy and focus and time and energy you pour into prep. It takes away from other stuff. And sometimes you don't even realize it until months after. So that's not a trade-off we want to make. That's a trade-off we have to make. That's not a feature. That's a bug, right? That's just the reality of that calculus. So in the off season, we want to make sure we're matching precision with needs. And many bodybuilders are being overly precise on things that have a much broader biological variation. So I'm personally not a good example, because I'm not just a bodybuilder. I compete in Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, and strongman. So if you were to ask me, like, Eric, is what you're doing optimal for bodybuilding? It's like, no, it's optimal for my goals. I make myself optimal for someone who's trying to compete in four sports. And you could say, well, that's stupid. And I go, I don't care. It's my goal. So I think, but another example might be, okay, so if I was just a bodybuilder, would I be different with my training? Hell yeah, and I have been. And from 2018, from all of 2018 and half of 2017, my training and my focus and my nutrition, all of that was geared towards competing in 2019. So I think absolutely the off season is arguably, for a competitor who knows how to get in shape, it's more important, because at the highest level than prep, at the highest level, like when you're let's say you started training at 21, now you're 28, and you're going to eventually be potentially a 37-year-old third place finisher at Worlds. Let's say that's who we're talking about here. The difference, the way you're going to look from 28 to 29 to 30 to 31 will be small. The difference when you compare 28 to 32 to 33 to 34, that's actually moderate. And then finally, there's enough of a change in your physique to where if you're shredded, you pose well, you get on stage, you full your peak right. That's when you get that bronze medal on the world stage. That happens in the off season because you're just getting better and better and better at the contest prep process and making it less and less stressful. What you need to be doing though is making progress in the off season and being able to objectively track it and still stay on point, even though, the time when you have to stop eating pizza is so far away, when you got to tell the guy at 9:35 a.m., hey, you turn around, you leave my house, Domino's guy. Thank you for opening specially to give me the Eric Helms breakfast Domino's special, but I need to get on point, and you go eat some tuna. So, but in all seriousness,
But
I
you're
think
bulking up for powerlifting, right? Everyone knows that they're fat, right?
everyone's fat. Everyone is super
You're
heavyweight,
growing
even
into
if they're
the show.
93 kilos. That's right. Yeah. So I think you need to understand that the off seasons last longer. They're more important. So if you are feeling burnout during the off season, you're not doing it right. You should be pushing yourself, but you need to be in a position where you're able to mentally and physically be really committed and enjoy the process. Um, in my opinion, athletes are at their best when they love what they're doing. When there's passion there. So I think finding a way to maintain a really happy relationship with the sport is going to pay off in the long run because it'll allow you to put in all of those that hard work. And I think being in love with progress is a big part of that too. Um, so there's a level of precision that will be right for everyone in the off season. There is a level of precision that is or isn't needed though. Like we could objectively say, you know what, I don't think a 10% or 20% shift in your carb to fat ratio is going to make much of a difference. I could objectively say, for someone who's relatively deep in the off season, I don't think your meal timing makes nearly much of a difference as it did during prep. I could objectively say, I don't think the where you get your carbs from matters nearly as much as where it might be when you only have 150 to play with or something like that. So all these things that you might track and manipulate during prep, you don't, and you shouldn't, in my opinion, manipulate them in the off season, even though you could. You could count the number of brush strokes that you do for when you brush your teeth. Is that going to necessarily make your teeth better? No, either you brush them well or you did not. Not everything needs to be measured. Only things that have a potential to aid in performance and that are things that if you don't measure them, they won't meet that requirement. So, for example, instead of having people track macros in the off season, I like to see people have a certain rate of weight gain, the output, and make sure that the things that they're not great at making sure are ticked and crossed off that to-do list are tracked. So have a running count of protein in your head if you're someone who doesn't eat enough protein. That's important, right? Things like that. So I think in the off season, we need to match up the precision with the needs and remember that optimal doesn't mean managing everything. Optimal is optimal. And if you're optimal with less precision or less managing of variables, that's better. So that's a hard thing for a lot of people to accept, especially when they simply like managing variables. And I'm not telling someone who enjoys and gets comfort, happiness from managing a lot of variables and tracking it and just enjoys seeing it to not, but don't do it at the cost of something else. Like if you are ignoring your hunger signals to track your macros, that's not good. Now, if you're eating modified based on your hunger and satiety, getting better awareness of your body's needs and tracking that to see what it is, that's fine. Then in that case, there's no trade-off. But that's just one of many examples.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's context dependent, right? So if someone's can't gain weight and they're full all the time, they're going to have to try. But to go back on the point,
maybe they're just tracking satiety. Maybe they need to track that I'm at a 5 out of 5 on satiety after every meal. I'm full. They don't necessarily need to track their macros per se.
Well, I mean, if someone's not gaining weight and they're struggling to eat enough, I've never had that problem. I could easily get to 250, no problem. But
yeah,
to go back to the point where you talked about, like, you really want to love it, the sport. I know some people, and in the past, I would say I've been obsessive or more obsessive than justified or than was needed. But actually, I loved it, and I know people that also love bodybuilding that can get obsessive, and you can almost rationalize being obsessive because you love it so much. And in bodybuilding, you can't. It's not like basketball or whatever. You can go out and you can work on your 3-pointer, and then you can do better in the next game. It's so slow that you always have to have this the fallacy of the must do something, or the just do it fallacy, or whatever it's called, where you feel like it's almost like an impatience where you need to be just kind of doing more and managing more so that you can feel like you're actually making progress, rather than sitting around for 6 months and seeing, if you're an intermediate bodybuilder or whatever, that you've gained a few pounds and you look no different because you're 20% body fat. So how do you know at the point where it's like, I'm getting, you're at the point of perhaps burning out? Is it just that you start feeling distance from it, or you don't want to train? Or because I haven't really felt burned out before personally, so I can't really explain what that is or how that would feel. But how would you know that I'm actually getting burnt out? And I had a friend, I remember when I was very young, introduced me to bodybuilding, and he doesn't even lift weights anymore at all, which is, for me, it's crazy. But like, he got me into bodybuilding back in the day. Like, we used to watch like the Animal Pack guys or whatever, but it must have been about 12 years ago or more. But what would that look like? How would someone know that they're getting burnt out, or I'm on the edge here, I need to kind of take a step back here so that I can actually allow myself to be in this long enough to see out my goals or whatever?
It starts to feel like a job. It starts to be something you do because you are ruthlessly committed to your goals, not because you're excited to reach your goals. It kind of feels like someone took the plug out on you being excited about it, you loving it, you enjoying it. And I think we all know what that feels like at some point deep into prep. But if that's happening in the off season, if that's happening early in prep, I think if it stops being worth it, people stop doing it, and you can definitely feel that sliding towards that. I think a lot of people experience this the most in the transitions. So the period after prep, where they're gaining weight, they don't like the way they look, it's too quick. They're thinking, crap, now I've got to diet in the off season. It's going to hinder my gains, but I want to compete next year, but I don't want to compete next year. When you start to feel that internal push and pull, that dissonance, the part of you that does not want to bodybuild and the part of you that does want to bodybuild, the more times those pieces of you are not on the same page, that creates stress, that creates that friction, that leads to those periodic phases of feeling like the plug's been pulled out. So whatever approach you take, it needs to be one where you're not trying to beat one of those voices into submission, but rather getting agreement between them. This is why a lot of competitors with 3DMJ don't compete annually. Sometimes they don't compete every other year. They take time off. Because if you've still got that dissonance, that part of you that's like, I really don't want to diet, but another part of you that's really excited to diet, if that's where it starts, that almost never goes well. Even if you white knuckle it all the way through prep, man, that's going to be your last season for a while. Yeah. So
I felt like that. I'd never felt like that in the off season, but now that you kind of explained it in prep, I definitely felt that towards between my last two shows, between September and I just started Masters and then the Worlds in November. By November, I was just like, the next day, I was just happy that I wasn't competing anymore. And not just because it was all over, like I just actually couldn't wait for it to, not to be make it sense of negative, but I was looking forward to just being over. Even a week before I'd even went to New York, I just was like, I'm done. It felt like I was looking a bit worse in general, just feeling like, just fed up with feeling like crap and tired, and I wanted to eat some food. But yeah, I can imagine if you felt that in the off season. But I knew from 100%. Competing 2 other seasons that I'm gonna feel like better in a few months and a few pounds time.
And that's another really good point, real briefly, is that your ability to bargain with those two parts of you and carry on in a way that benefits you, rather than is a negative, even during prep, gets better over time. So I remember my very first season, I competed in shows in April or no, early May, and I started dieting in January. And I could not make it to June. There was another show that I was supposed to do in June. So I did a show in May and then another show 2 weeks later in May, and I pulled the pin. Um, and then in '09, I competed from January to September, but I burned myself out so bad that as soon as I had won a show in my August season, I did 2 shows. I did 5 in '09, and then in 2011, I won a show in August, and I was done. Even though there was a show with all of the 3DMJ coaches that we were planning on doing just the next month, I was like, I can't. There's no way I can go another 3 weeks, which is insane now. And then now this time in in 2019, I was dieting from mid-December all the way through August, and I had like multiple conversations with myself in late July after the show we did together, the Mayhem. Do I want to keep going? Like, there's a show in Singapore I could do, and I'm going to be there with Berto. And it's going to be a pain in the ass to try to be there for 3 weeks, yada yada, all this stuff. And eventually, I just had to really assess like which one of those two voices had a stronger voice, and what would I be more happy with? What would I enjoy? How am I feeling physically? And I was like, let's do this one show in August in New Zealand, and that's it. You know what? The main critique you guys need to be a little bigger anyway, and you're already shredded. You've been shredded for fucking like 5 months now. Let's finish. So that conversation wasn't one that I was self-aware enough to have, and it would have been so much more dominated by one voice than the other in different ways in '07 and '09. '09 I would have just kept pushing no matter what. I ran out of shows in '09. '09 I was like, no matter what, I'm going to get my pro card, and I just kept pushing. Did a show on September 28th, and I didn't have the financial ability or the job flexibility to fly around the world to keep competing. So that was it. That's all there was in California. But in '07, it was like I could not take another step. I was so burnt out. So finding, being able to listen to both voices is something that happens with experience.
Mm. Yeah, that's a really good point. And just the final question before we wrap up, Eric, is how does someone become a successful bodybuilder or have the mindset, say, in spite of not winning shows? So like everybody wants to win shows or get a pro card, and people who love bodybuilding, their goal is my goal is to whatever XYZ, but it's not always possible. The same as in the Olympics, it's not everyone can come first either. How do you have that mindset? Because bodybuilding is such you have such a long career, you obviously need to maintain a mindset that even if I lose, I can still deem myself to be successful. I've seen it in the past where people have competed and they came second and they went on a big rant and saying how upset they were and this is not what they expected. But I mean, anybody can show up, on the day. So, and
you might get the Ireland's national champ show up and just take you out, in your hometown. You know what I'm saying? You never know what's going to happen. Shout out to you for whooping my ass.
That wasn't directed at you, by the way. That was just in general.
I know, but I was just making. I found myself in that exact same situation though, where I have lost, and I've framed it as a loss, and that immediately reminds me, like, hold on, like, is the reason I'm here to get a plastic trophy and to take first? That's a nice accolade. That's a nice thing to get, and absolutely, there's nothing wrong with being extrinsically motivated. But like you said, not everyone gets to be world champion. It's only one person each year. Or in Natural Bodybuilding in the States, like 10 people because we have 10 different federations. but no, you're 100% right. WNBF champion, absolutely. The main Natural Bodybuilding champion. There's only one every year. So I think this is true of all sports, in that if you are purely focused on winning, you can do extremely well, have made incredible progress, do something that less than 1% of athletes can even do, and not be happy. And I think that's tragic. That mindset taken too far can really leave someone with just the joy sapped out of an athletic career. And we know that's the way cognitive biases work too. We typically rate the peak experience or the experience near the end of something. So if you're just going and going and going and going and going, I'll retire once I'm a world champion, and you don't reach it, you can have a sour taste in the mouth despite this amazing thing that you've done over the last couple of decades. And when I see that, I think it is just totally tragic. I really do. So I think one needs to have some ownership of how they define success, and I think in team sports, uh, camaraderie, going through a journey with a team, enjoyment, having your role to play, and sharing the burden of a loss there's kind of a natural pathway to that. I've seen teams who can take a lot of pride and have somber reflection. They still want to improve, but they're able to collectively come together and be like, we had a really rough season, but man, we stuck it out. We learned some things. We're going to come back stronger for this. They can frame it as a positive. That's a really good thing. And individuals can celebrate, I got better at playing my position, or we got better doing this, or my fitness improved XYZ. A lot more opportunities. In individual sport, you don't have that. But what you do have is the fact that you can always look back to your prior performances. And I think the first step when I have someone who's probably too focused on winning is just to work on beating themselves. And that works great until you're truly at the point where you're either injured or just too old to improve. But that gives you a lot of time to work on enjoying the process and finding other ways to achieve success. Doing bodybuilding without it negatively impacting any other aspect of your life. We talked about the trade-offs of having a certain obsessive mindset in prep, how that can hurt you socially or with your relationships, or hindering other aspects of your life. I think success in bodybuilding is someone who can do this thing they love, change their body, get it to look cool, have this little personal science experiment, as Eric Trexler talks about, what he loves about it, but have it be less and less impactful in a negative way on other aspects of your life. So for me in 2019, one of the biggest wins was that I got to go speak in Melbourne. I got to go speak in London. I got to go speak I got to travel all around the world and do my normal thing while also getting the best shape of my life and having a really good competitive season from an external perspective. And I was publishing papers. My life felt the least impacted it's ever been. And I got on stage with my best physique. I didn't win a pro card. And that would have made it a little bit better, but it certainly wasn't the only thing that I held to hold up as kind of my success there. So I think for me, I have a very clear story that I'm telling for myself, like my own journey means something. And it has an arc, it has a purpose, it has definitions for what a successful season is, not impacting those around me, learning something, becoming a better human through the process, achieving my best physique, or dealing with the adversity as best as I can to make the best of a bad situation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's going to look different for everybody, but they need to have it. So having that internal conversation to decide what is success, take winning off the table, and you have to be able to have something. Or then you're basically saying, those 7 judges right there, I'm going to give them all the power to decide whether I'm happy or successful. And it's okay to give them a little bit of power. It's okay to want to be a WBF world champion, or to want to get your pro card, or to want to win a novice class. But you don't want to have that be your only motivation, or that you probably will burn out. Like Ronnie Coleman, yeah, he won eight Mr. Olympias, but he didn't stop training after that. So clearly it wasn't just bodybuilding. He started competing in bodybuilding because it gave him a free gym membership. So he loves training. He loved the process. He loved winning, and he did everything he could to win that Sandow and won 8 times. But he was able to hold those two things together. I love lifting. I love the process. I love being a bodybuilder in this journey I'm on, and I love being the best in the world. Or that might be, 3rd best in Pennsylvania for you, or whoever's listening to this. So I think you need to be able to have internal metrics for success that sustain you, regardless of whether you're actually outwardly better or not as a bodybuilder. So if you're someone right now who can't understand why this dude's competing in like the Masters 3 division, even though he used to be better, well, who loves bodybuilding more, you or him? Think about it that way. And then how do you get to be that? And that requires a lot of internal discovery and discussions.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important point, and something that I've been trying to think about personally as well for my next season. Like objectively, I think it's going to be hard for me to do better in bodybuilding shows. So I don't want to be in my next season, which I think will be the year after next, 2022. I want to get a pro card. I would love to get a pro card, but I could rock up to the show in England that's a pro qualifier, and Andrew Chappelle could show up and hand me my plane ticket home to Dublin, So
Yep.
I don't want to be setting the expectations not too high, but setting myself up for a higher probabilistic failure, which means there's a higher chance I'm going to be disappointed or upset with the last 12 months of dieting or however long it's been. And also I work with some new competitors as well. And I know that, they want to do well, but at the same time, if you got, multiple people, if I've got multiple clients competing in the same class, they can't, not all of them's going to win. So
That's right.
it's, I think it's a really important point to hammer home that you need to find. And you did have a really good season. Like you said, you mentioned how smooth it seemed. I mean, it's going to be difficult at some point anyway, just from the physiological points of view, but you're pumping out papers. I know you said there was a bit of a period of time where you actually felt it, that it may have impacted your work, but that's always going to be the case.
Yeah, it impacted it less than I expected. It eventually happened. And I remember after the mayhem, I did mention to Berto, oh man, I was really hoping I'd win that show, but I lost. And that was a moment where, I even lost track of my story. So I think, I make it sound like, hey, eventually you'll get to this point where you can have that narrative, and you can also have the drive to win. It's easy to lose that or to get it out of balance. So that's something that requires consistent attention as well. Placing second in a big show, a worthy, very good competitor, isn't a loss to me normally. So when I framed it that way, that was an immediate alarm bell for me. Like, oh shit, I'm getting too wrapped up in it's time to win. So I think the key point is self-awareness for that part. You just got to stay self-aware and keep talking and keep track of what your meaning in the sport is.
Yeah, well, it is difficult. I mean, it's competitive natural bodybuilding. It's not, like some sort of socialist, everybody gets first place. Like, there's competition there, and it's fun to compete in any sport when it's, you can lose. So it's hard to balance that out, especially in bodybuilding where, there's a huge genetic component to it as well versus some other sports that you can not be that great and just be very skillful and work very hard. Not that you can't do that in bodybuilding, but it's definitely something that you need to balance out. And you often hear people as well saying second place is worse than last place because you're so close, you know what I mean?
Yeah. It doesn't tell you that, oh man, you need to really get serious, or you place last. Like, you need to do better. Like, okay, sure. Yeah.
Anyway, Eric, that's it for this podcast. Thanks a lot for coming on. But where can people find more about you? I know you've been jet setting a lot last year, and this year you probably haven't even left the country more than once. But what have you got coming up? What are you doing? Any papers coming up?
Yep. So absolutely no travel. I haven't traveled since March, and been nice. So what's coming up? I've got a meet coming up, and we just published a couple papers in the Journal of Human Kinetics. We had one comparing low bar and high bar squats. We had another good review that I think is very reader friendly on monitoring resistance training, which talks about like auto regulation and other tools you can use to assess when you need to make changes. So that's pretty cool. We may be releasing another chapter of the lifting library this year, or we might push that off till next year, just because people don't even have gym access right now. So we don't want to be like, hey, would you love to know how to do these movements that you don't have access to? So we're still figuring out when to do that, but that's in the works. It's going to be very good. And yeah, just gearing up for the end of the year. I can't believe we're almost already approaching 2021. It's nearly November. But anyway, you can find me at 3dmusclejourney.com. 3dmusclejourney.com. Everything's there. Links out. All the fun stuff.
Yeah, I'll put your Instagram. I think it's Helms 3DMJ, and you have
That's the one.
And Mass as well, which is great. I'm been subscribed for a long time, and I actually just listened to one of your podcasts with I think it was Dr. Cody Hahn earlier. Great podcast. Anyway, Eric,
thanks, man.
Great to chat to you, dude. Have a good Thursday.
Take care.